Worldwide, around 1 billion people live with a disability. Many of them are successfully employed, but overall, firms are still missing out heavily when it comes to making use of the potential which people with disabilities have. With International Day of Persons with Disabilities taking place on Sunday, we'll talk about why and how to change that in a moment after this.
In Germany, 3 million people have a severe disability, and only half of those between 16 and 65 have a regular job. That's representative of the average employment rate of people with disabilities in the EU, where 1 in 2 are employed. The rates are even lower in other regions. It's about a quarter in Asia Pacific, and the figure falls further in the US and Latin America. Despite efforts to include more people with disabilities in the formal labor market and rising levels of employment rates worldwide, people with disabilities continue to face widespread discrimination and marginalization. Their exclusion from the formal labor market deprives the world of an estimated 1.4 to 1.9 trillion US dollars in lost GDP every year, according to the International Labour Organization.
All right, let's get more on this from Caroline Cassie. She's the founder of the Valuable 500, a global business collective working together to end disability exclusion in the workplace. Welcome to DW. Where do those regional differences that we just saw in the report come from?
Well, I think every different country and culture has a very different understanding of disability. And I think that's how you're seeing a difference in employment rates or in the lives of people with disabilities. Traditionally, disability would be seen as something that is less than or damaged or charitable. And one of the things in Europe we have is the social model, which is basically saying it's not the person with the disabilities that's the problem, it's the way society has been designed for it. So it just depends on what culture and what context you're speaking to.
Caroline, you say companies are losing big by not employing people with disabilities. What are the arguments that you hear for not employing people with disabilities?
We don't hear arguments about not. We're just not seeing the absolute understanding of the value that people with disabilities and their families can deliver to the economy and to business. And you've got to remember that figure of 1.3 billion and a mother and a father is 54% of our global economy. And people forget that disability comes in all shapes and forms. I myself have a disability, but it will touch everybody's life at some point. And the issue is that, again, people don't recognize that 13 trillion. So we're talking about a loss of 1.9 trillion potentially to the economy. But let's flip that around and say people with disabilities and their families have 13 trillion to offer. The reason that we're not seeing that connection is we forget that people with disabilities and their families are also consumers. And how can companies adequately and successfully engage in that market if they're not connecting that to having the talent in their business to understand how to serve that consumer base? People with disabilities bring huge levels of insight and innovation and brand differentiation to organizations. And we're still trying to hammer that home. This is not about charity. This is an economic issue, and it's an issue of value.
So what are the points that you can specifically address here when it comes to making a case for people with disabilities being a stronger part of the workforce?
Well, so, we're often asked is like, what's the business case? And, I think we've now finally moved beyond that. I think this is about a risk for business because when we see the figures and the population that connects to disability and you add in aging, but there are some things that we're really finding that are working. And one of the biggest parts with the Valuable 500, so we work with 500 of the world's biggest companies and CEOs, 13 of which are actually headquartered in Germany. It's about the leadership of the organization, taking accountability and being intentional and investing or supporting the business in investing. The second thing is we already know that anything between 12 to 15% of every single company has a connection to disability, but it's not being disclosed. And that's a huge opportunity for intelligence in the business because 80% of disability is invisible. The most important thing is we've got to start reporting We've got to start getting that data, because without data, we're not
Right.
going to be able to do anything. And I want to make a shout out to Allianz, which is one of the Valuable 500's iconic companies, and Oliver Beta. And what we have done is looked at 5 harmonized metrics that we want our companies to start reporting on in their annual reports, so we can have a sense of what's happening, because without that, we can do nothing with it. Employee resource groups, how do we get them together with an executive sponsorship?
Right.
Making sure our companies are talking to the disability community, because that's the way we can solve this issue.
Caroline Casey of the Valuable 500 Collective, thank you very much.